17 years ago in a coordinated terrorist strike on our country. As we reflect on those heroes who gave so much following those horrific attacks, and I came across an interesting story today. The Coast Guard conducted the largest water evacuation that day, getting more than 500,000 people out of lower Manhattan and away from the wreckage. The evacuation was larger than the 1940 World War II evacuation of Dunkirk. Joining me now is former U.S. Army Special Forces officer Steve Bucci, who was Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Defense at the Pentagon on 9/11. Steve, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on this day.
It's a pleasure to have you. Let's talk about your thoughts on that particular day. It's hard to believe it's been 17 years, but the memories do come rushing back, don't they?
They do. It was hard watching the Fox shows this morning. They did a great job with a retrospective of that day. But I got to admit, it's pretty hard to watch some of that news footage and sort of live it all again.
Now, of course, we all have personal stories. You know, I have mine. I was in New York City. My gym was part of the crime scene. My office was in the shadow of the World Trade Center. And you have your own stories, not just yours, but family members as well.
That's right. I was Secretary Rumsfeld's military assistant on 9/11 as I was there working, and I brought my wife to work with me that morning because she was going to do a job interview to be a volunteer nurse in the Pentagon clinic. Well, she got the job because she started working as soon as that plane hit, and she spent the rest of the day and, frankly, the next 14 years working there at the Pentagon.
You know, Steve, your wife and so many others, there's so many unsung heroes. And, you know, I love that their stories come out more and more each year. And I was struck. I don't know how I never read this story. 500,000 people evacuated, larger than Dunkirk. You know, I've seen both Dunkirk movies, right? The more recent one, the old one, both of them are fantastic. I've read about it. The story is remarkable about the UK and its resolve. But this was a great example of America's resolve as well, wasn't it?
Absolutely. This was a horrific day. We saw, you know, some of the most tragic stuff we've ever experienced, but we also saw some of the most heroic we've ever seen. There in New York, you had the Coast Guard, the New York and New Jersey port authorities. They even have a naval militia component that helped, and they got all those folks off. There was no plan to evacuate Manhattan. Nobody ever thought we'd have to do it. But they realized when you close down the bridges and the tunnels and the mass transits down, you got to get those people off somehow, and those folks found a way to do it. Incredible innovation, incredible courage, incredible hard work, because that's what was needed that day.
So, Steve, it's 17 years later. I mean, as someone who's involved as deeply as you were, U.S. Special Forces, we're still engaged in conflict and combat over in the Middle East. Where do you see this ending, and how do we come to the realization that we won't win this, and we find a way to get out of there and stop losing young men and women at this point?
You know, that's a choice the leadership has to make. This kind of war, you know, nobody should expect us to end up having a treaty signed on the deck of a battleship like we did at the end of World War II. That's just not what's going to happen. We're going to keep fighting to protect our people and our interests as long as there's a threat. Right. You can't just give up because the other guys haven't given up. And we've got the young men and women who are willing to do that because the country needs them to. Yeah. So that's what we're going to have to do. Millions
of young men and women have joined the service since this horrific incident. It just, again, underscores just how great this country is. Steve, thank you very much, and God bless you and your family, and God bless all the survivors. Now, here's Lou.